there's a lot of luck in the madness of filmmaking. It always amazes me how any film is ever made, but it requires trust in the process, in yourself. If you've done the work, you have to always do the work. Like, you can't just wing it. There's certain things that are in your control, and there's certain things that are going to always be out of your control. And those things you just have to just ride the storm.
Hello and welcome back to the Blue Moggy Podcast. My name is Rachel Stevens. I am a writer, director, producer and all-around filmmaker, and on this show I'll be joined by other filmmakers, writers, composers and more, talking about how they got started in film and media, talking about projects they've worked on so far and sharing tips and advice to you guys listening. On this episode, I was joined via Zoom by writer-director Athena Mandis. We talked about Athena's short films, how she's developing one of them into a feature film, her experience with film festivals and film labs, and how she got started making documentaries. On the next episode of the podcast, I'll be joined by Chris Wood and DL, who are musicians and film and TV composers, talking about working with filmmakers to create the score for their films and the projects they've worked on. This podcast is produced by Blue Moggy Media, and there'll be new episodes every other Wednesday. But that's all for the intro for now, so here is my conversation with Athena Mandis. Hi Athena, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, hi Rachel, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
I'm good on this very grey Tuesday afternoon.
Yes, it's a little bit cold today. So I was actually put in touch with you by a mutual of ours, DL, who's actually going to be on the next episode of the podcast.
Oh, that was amazing.
But she said that you'd be someone that interesting to talk to because of, in particular, what she said was about your experience with film festivals, with some of your short films.
Yeah. That's very nice of her to put me up. She's amazing. She's such a talented woman in music. So yeah, I think that just goes to show how networking works with in film, actually, or in all the creative industries, is kind of getting out and meeting people. Yeah.
Get into the short films in a minute, but first, did you want to sort of introduce yourself and like what it is exactly you do in film?
Okay, so I am. When someone says, "Who are you?" So I'm a filmmaker. What that means is I make films, I write, I direct, and by default, sometimes I have to produce or start that process. I also, as the day job, I'm a lecturer in film practice at Queen Mary University, which is wonderful because it means I get to try out my own learning, because one never stops learning on students. I'm also a student, I feel, a lot of the time, and kind of going to hopefully, current knowledge, doing it, I can sort of advise and instruct in a way that comes from relevant experience.
And where did your sort of film journey begin?
So I love those questions, and as a filmmaker, I used to, when you go out and you hear panels and whenever people ask these questions, they're great because you find maps and sometimes you think that map works with yours. My one was by accident. So I was always passionate about theatre, and I did an MA in advanced theatre practice many moons ago. But I was fortunate enough to work with a very, very talented theatre director, theatre maker, really, because it was in device theatre, called David Glass. So I became part of the ensemble as a dramaturg for about 6 years. I think I worked with David and the ensemble. And then through that, while I was there, a friend of mine was working on a Mexican photojournalist, and she was telling me about it. And I just thought, oh my God, that would make an amazing documentary. And she said, well, why don't you do it? And I'm like, I have no idea. I don't know how to make a film. I mean, I was using cameras to record rehearsals and stuff like that for, R&D work, but I've never really thought about film. Loved film, was a real cinephile, still am, but never thought that that was a possible avenue. And then it just happened that she was going, and I thought, I'll go for a recce. And I took a camera from the theatre company, because we had cameras. I mean, a really big, a clumsy camera. I never used a camera before, never used that one. I then did a weekend course, how to self-shoot, at an organisation called Documentary Filmmakers Group. And off I went with my camera, my tripod and my microphones, and just chucked myself really at the deep end, not really thinking that was going to ever be a documentary, but I thought I could start the process and see where it ends up. And I just went, I'll film everything. And I think my training as a dramaturg meant that I had a real grasp of story. So I knew where to point the camera. That instinct was alive. And then just getting that film made from, going to Mexico, shooting, coming back with, I think it was like 70 hours of footage, then going, what do I do with this? And each step, I was discovering the next step. I couldn't see beyond the next step. But that was a real baptism of fire. And that really got me hooked on telling stories really through the visual media of film. And then the next thing I wanted to do was a short film, and found, so through shooting people, actually, someone had pitched an idea, and Stephen Raby had put up an idea called Backroads, and it was about sex trafficking in the Fens. And I loved the idea. We met up and got on with Rupert and found a producer. We found the money. She basically went out, found the money for the short, and we shot that. And that was then slated on British Council. And then I got the job at Queen Mary. So it was really one step at a time. And I think in the early stages, I didn't really get how you make it into what's the next part of the journey, or looking at it in a, how do you get there, or whatever that there is. I didn't even know how to define there. So I'd forget about how I was going anywhere. And in those days, and it wasn't that long ago, but it was long enough before there were any initiatives to support emerging filmmakers. And definitely women got, back of the queue. And definitely if you were a kind of not an Oxbridge graduate, or your face didn't fit the bill, you were definitely pushed at the back of the queue. So it wasn't as easy as, say, now for people coming in who there's a lot more opportunities for emerging voices. At the time, there really wasn't. And then, of course, as you get older and you're not, people would see you in a different way. So, but you can't let that stuff hold you back. You just do one thing, then the next thing, then the next thing, and each one makes it clearer. You learn a lot by doing.
That's really interesting. I love hearing how people get into film, because it isn't like a sort of one size fits all for everyone. It's
No, I mean there are sorts of, I mean, it's interesting. I teach film, and so I teach a lot. I talk to them a lot about how they get into film and what are the different pathways. So, you do have your standard pathways, and I do feel that if you go to film school, that is a very fast track pathway to making films, because if you go to the NFTS or the London Film School, which are the two main ones that we have in this country, you will come out with quality work. And because it's coming from a quality film school, it does mean it will go to the quality festivals. So it isn't like always an open door policy where everyone comes in equal, just some are more equal than others kind of thing. And I think film school does offer a fast track, equally as does getting an early apprenticeship into the bigger productions that are happening around the country, because you get to meet the people, the decision makers. And if you are a runner on a really important, high level production, and you run well, you make a decent cup of tea, you don't whinge, you turn up and you do that properly, you will be noticed, because that old adage of how you do one thing is how you do everything stands. But if you think, I can't be fucking arsed, I'm not going to do it, I can't make a cup of tea. God, I want to be a filmmaker. I want to hang around with the camera department or with the directing department. I don't want to be stuck with props and shoveling scissors from one room to the other. If that's your attitude, you won't go anywhere. So there aren't rules, but there are rules. I think if you're super, super talented, and I would say that only probably 1% of people making stuff sit in that 1% of super, super talented, where they could get away with murder because actually they genuinely have a unique voice. They genuinely have a way of expressing themselves through the medium that really is, wow, amazing. But most of us are not in that category, and that means most people who are working in that in the fields are not in that category. What they tend to become is good at their crafts, so they do the work, and it's a lot of work, as you know, Rachel, because you yourself are a filmmaker, and I bet you spent many a night working to get things done, and no pay.
Yeah, maybe a few nights. One thing I wanted to talk to you about, from sort of my research, and I guess it would probably tie into your job as a lecturer, is how much you sort of support grassroots, or have an interest in supporting grassroots and sort of helping with engagement in film. Has that been the case from the start?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things I love teaching is, like, I do love working with people who are right at the beginning of their journey, and there's sometimes they don't even know they're on that journey. But that goes back to, I think, when I worked in theatre as well. So when I worked for the ensemble, we did a lot of participatory projects through through our sort of sister organisation called the Lost Child Project. And with that, we would travel to developing countries, and we would work with forum theatre, with street kids mainly, and devise stories that we then presented back into the community. And, so I think for me, that's always been part of my practice. I think a lot of my training as an artist or as a practitioner, be it theatre or be it film, I think has come from working with the David Glass Ensemble, and I think that kind of rooted me in a way of approaching art. So for me, it's not just about the end product. It's about the process that gets us there. The process is important. How we bring people with us. So for every production that we've done, any film work that I've done, I've always incorporated an element where there's someone just starting out, getting that first experience. When I was at Queen Mary, I set up Mile End Films, which was an initiative to really help graduating students get some real experience to put on their CV so they could get that next job. And a lot of them that came through there, built that confidence to move out and make films. And we've got Stella Corraldi, who won the BAFTA for Windrush, and came through that whole, she did her MA at Queen Mary, and she worked with Mile End Films. She went off and did other things, but all of these things are steps. And so I think wherever possible, I can create a space for that. I think it is important, because that dialogue needs to stay alive, really.
And you were talking before about how when you sort of started, there wasn't as many opportunities for sort of new emerging voices as there aren't out. Do you think that is the case now, that there is a lot more opportunity?
I think for the young, definitely. And I think that I'm glad there's been a shift to be more inclusive and diverse, so which I applaud. So I think for the emerging market, I think, yes, there are more opportunities. What happens at the top, I think it's still the same people making stuff. It'd be interesting to see in 10 years' time how many of the people that come through the sort of bottom ranks of these initiatives get to travel to the top end of the finance structures, and time will tell.
What I've heard, but can't remember the exact statistic, but it's harder to get your second film made than your first one. It's just, especially like feature level.
Yeah.
Do you think that's something we were talking about before we started recording? It's about thinking about what's next. Like, once you've made one film, what's next?
Yeah, I haven't made my first, so I'm not, but I do have a slate of films. So I'm not working on one film and putting all my energy and killing myself to get one off the ground. So when that finishes, I'm starting at zero. I want to finish the first one and have the second one that's ready to go. And I think quite often what will happen is, especially with young, and I mean young, I don't mean it in age, I mean it in sort of in career. And this is what I've noticed. It's not my experience, but my conversations with people who make that first film usually tend to throw everything at it. And they are burnt out by the end. So when at the end, now when I mean the end is when you're there at the festivals or wherever you are screening it, and you've got that whole other year that's following the film that you've just made, and someone comes and says, well, what do you do next? If you don't have that next, that window starts closing. So you will be starting from scratch, because then you're not, unless that first film really breaks it, like we say, we were talking before we started about how it's only 2 or 3% of all films that get made that get distribution, i.e. that they get seen by anyone, so that's a lot of films are made that no one sees. Sundance this year, 70 films were screened, feature films, only 10% got distribution, including one that opened at Cannes, Joyride. So, these are the top of the, the structures. We're not talking about the other film festivals that, no one gives a shit about, apart from, you because you got in and your mum can come and see your film. These ones that play at a sort of international level, films still struggle to see the light of day. So I think we have to be cleverer as independent filmmakers in thinking about how we engage the audience for our film at the beginning of that process, because we have to take ownership of that. Otherwise, this idea that our funding structures already promote, which is, make it and they'll come, because that's okay if you've got a film with Lionsgate and they're going to put 25 million into a marketing budget, or you're making the next Marvel. No one really cares. There's an audience already there, which they, the whole team is working on that. But I think as an independent filmmaker, you need to start the buzz about your film sooner. And you also need to have a slate of films, projects that you're working on that are at different stages. And for each one, you need to be thinking about, well, who's going to go and watch this? And it isn't, a checklist of 18 to 34-year-olds, because that doesn't mean anything. But who is interested in this subject matter? And it might just be, the 20 people on my street, because it's a film about my street. But then that's your core audience. So you have to start engaging them super early in the project before you even get any money on the table, and that's really where the work is. And I think if you have a slate and you work through things in a systematic, strategic way, your second film will happen. I think it's harder if you're starting from zero. If you like go, I've made it, now I need to stop because I'm exhausted. And then next year you come to think about your second film, then it's harder because your first film might not have quite, it lit the world with glory.
Yeah.
I think we dream in this kind of X Factor world that, you make a film and it's going to win an Oscar and you're going to be catapulted to success. And sure, that happens to, 1 in a million. That's great. That's not, you have to think about what's the next film? What am I doing in these next 5 years? And to try and mitigate against that second film, impossibility.
Yeah.
This is theory, of course. Ask me in a couple of years' time and see where we are.
Yeah.
When you realize it's all bullshit.
No, definitely makes sense. Use the momentum of being in the production or the post-production of the film to step into the next one rather than actually starting again. Because for feature films that could be a 2-3 year process or more.
Well, it's a 3-year process if it's the minimum.
Yeah.
That's when things are working. That's when you know where your money's coming from. So it's probably 5 or 6 years. So in that time, you need to keep the embers alive on that project and be generating more work and ideas and, doing a short in a day, doing your 48-hour challenge. Amazing. That kind of stuff. Because the more you get behind the camera, the more you get into producing, into whatever it is, the strand that you want to focus in, doing it on the little stuff. So you're not just waiting for this massive thing, because you know what? You could get to the point where after 3 years, you've been trying to make something and you realize it's not going to happen. So what do you do then? That's why it's important, I think, to have at least, I don't know, between 3 and 5 projects that you're genuinely working through and constantly having a space to create new ideas that keep you fresh.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, in many ways, the opportunities come from left field. They don't come from the plan you're making. I mean, Losing Grace, as we're talking about, say if I talk about my last 2 short films. So Losing Grace is the one that we're working towards to make into a feature now. But that came as a kind of my mate, just when I've got an idea. It was something completely different. And I just thought, well, she's, I like working with her. Could be fun. I didn't actually think it was going to ever take off, because the more we, started to look at it, it looked like quite a big budget film for the short that, we were trying to do. And I knew I didn't want to do another zero budget, low budget short. I've been there, done that, and that's fine. I knew that the next step up had to be something that you could see the money on the screen kind of thing and not compromise too much on the quality to get there. So I kind of, thought maybe that's not going to happen. But that happened and took off a lot more than the one that got shortlisted by the BFI Network Fund. And, I had chosen to go down a specific road with. So it's kind of being open to yeses. Being able to say no as well is a very powerful thing. But sometimes it's don't underestimate the sort of tangential stuff happening. If it's fun, go with it. That's my rule. If it's fun, I'll say yes. I'll find space and time to do it. And then if I'm not interested in something, it's when I'll say no, but not to preempt the outcome. You never know.
So let's pivot slightly. So you've brought up Losing Grace. So let's pivot slightly. I wanted to talk to you about that film and how you made that. So was it one of the actors that came to you with the idea? Was that? Yeah,
so Liz Farahadi, she's an old friend, and we know each other from when our daughters were going to nursery. And she had come to me before with a feature script that she was working on, but needed a lot of work, and I was happy to help. And then she came with an idea, and it was around a cult. And we then had there was a pitch call for, I think it was in the Palace competition, which is part of the film festival. They had a pitching competition, and we had I think about 3 days to put together an application for this. And it was a really good experience because I realized quite early on that Liz was on it like me. So she had enough drive and passion, and she turned up and did the work. And we put together a pitch for that, and we got selected. And she went and pitched, and the story was still around a cult. And then I think we got some feedback, and then it was but didn't there was a lot. So I think we were trying to do too much in a short space of time. And then we started to kind of take one step at a time with it. We entered it into another competition, and we got some great notes. And then that's when I went, okay, look, I'll rework this. And that's when it sort of started to evolve into a domestic abuse story, based on some of the notes that we had. And then once we knew we had that, she had just come back from the Isle of Man, and I said, oh, it'd be great to shoot this in the Isle of Man. Never been, but it sounded so remote. We knew we wanted a remote place. And she went, yeah, it'd be great. It looked amazing. And I think we just kept sort of going like we were making it. We didn't really, if someone said, but how? I don't understand. So we just kept taking the next step until we would be stopped almost. So we started the crowdfunding campaign with this commitment to the Isle of Man. We'd never been. But I remember Peter Story sending me a message, who runs Greenlit, which was the platform that we did our crowdfunding on, saying, oh, have you heard of Isle of Media? And this is their media arm at the Isle of Man. I think they're no longer in operation, but at the time they were quite active. And I said no. So I looked them up, and lo and behold, the following day, they were in London on a big event at the Charlotte Street Hotel, inviting everybody who wanted to shoot in the Isle of Man. It was a lot of serendipity. So I said to Liz, we're going. I don't care. If you have to bring your dog, you bring Pippa, because we've got to be there. Otherwise, we're wasting our time. So we turned up, and there we met Leanne, who became our production manager. And the following week, we found ourselves in the Isle of Man. We just decided that we would go. And then we let everyone that we met there know the day before we were going. And they welcomed us. And so everything was very and then we had a meeting with the Isle of Media Arts Council. We had a pitch. So we had, stuff to show people. We had a trailer, a teaser, and they loved the project, told us to apply, which we felt was in the bag. And that was 5,000. So and then the campaign element, and this is where I think a lot of the ideas around us creating a campaign and impact strategy for the feature film were discovered, because it was domestic abuse and we had this crowdfunding campaign, we attracted quite a lot of survivors and people who were affected by those issues. And through that, we got quite a bit of our funding, albeit in kind as well, on the island. And it was just literally one step at a time. It was just trusting that it was okay to just plan the next one. And even when we were 6 weeks away from shooting, we put a pin in the, in the diary that's we're going to shoot on those days. We still didn't have all the money. And our producer at the time couldn't continue for personal reasons. So there we were in December 2019. And we were like, what do we do? Do we push it back or do we just go for it? And we went, let's just go for it, because I don't know how we're going to get any more ready. I know we haven't got the money, but we're just going to have to trust it will come. And then you work out VAT and you work out all sorts of, suddenly money does appear that you need, literally the amount you need. And we went ahead in February 2020. And then, of course, we know what happened in March 2020, don't we? The whole world locked down. So had we not gone for it, we wouldn't have made the film. Yeah. And sometimes you just have to, instinct is so important, that little voice inside your head. And as you get older, you learn to trust it more. And we just went with it. And it was an amazing lesson. Everything that shouldn't have happened. It was February on the Isle of Man. And, for your audience, the Isle of Man is a rock, basically, in the middle of the Irish Sea, equidistant from Northern Ireland and the north of England. So in February, there's a massive storm. I can't remember what storm we were in the middle of. And even the day that we were traveling, so I was in the lorry with all the kit that we were going down with a driver who couldn't really drive. I mean, that's another story. But in the pouring rain, going to Morecambe and beyond to get on this ferry at Heysham, blizzards of stink. Had we missed that ferry, and we were 5 minutes from missing it, but had we missed it, the next ferry out was like 3 days later. So we get there and it's raining and it's freezing cold. I think the chill factor from the wind was like -60. That was like, we had drone shots and sunny shots and all sorts of shots that were written in there. February days are tiny. But it seemed to rain when we were indoors. And then when we were out, and the one day that we needed to be sunny, the sun came out and the wind died down, and we got our drone out and we got our people running, and we got onto the boats, and we had all of these other things. And everyone was just a bit like, I don't really know how this happened. And we just went, let's not jinx it. Let's just go with it. So there's a lot of luck in the madness of filmmaking. It always amazes me how any film is ever made, but it requires trust in the process, in yourself. If you've done the work, you have to always do the work. Like, you can't just wing it. There's certain things that are in your control, and there's certain things that are going to always be out of your control. And those things you just have to just ride the storm. And like in that wonderful film with Terry Gilliam, Lost in La Mancha, I think that, one has to go watch that. No, I remember watching it and going, oh my God, I can't even imagine something worse, when it comes to making something. But it's up to the gods, and you just have to, if there's too much resistance towards something, it usually is because it's not quite right for you now. Move on, But once you go on that journey, you just hold on tight, because the ride has begun, and just trust that you'll be all right at the other end.
That sounds like, you had quite an ordeal just getting it made.
I think it's an ordeal if you think about all the things that could have gone wrong.
Yeah.
Nothing went wrong. We had a situation where our line producer on the island had found all these locations, and there was one location which was in the north of the island for a drive-in scene. And it was a bit dull. DP didn't like it. It was like a good 40-minute drive or a half an hour drive. But, as you move the units over, it would be an hour. And we didn't have time in the schedule to do that. But where we were staying was perfect. So, of course, we couldn't lock off the roads with short notice. But we had a really experienced grip who was in the crew, a local guy. And, we talked through the health and safety of doing it on a live road. And we, found a way that we would do it completely safe for the actor driving and for the cameras and for everyone, and you have to just work with that. But that's because you know what you're doing, and you can ask the right questions and get the right answers, but never take the risks that will jeopardize anyone's health. I think that's a kind of given. But, you need to have a team with you that know what they're doing. If you don't, I like to be the person sometimes, and it's not always the case, but I like to be the person that knows least in the room, because then that's when you learn a lot. I think working with people above you, in experience and that is, I think it's invaluable.
And the crew, was it a mixture of people you'd worked with before, or was it mostly new?
Didn't work with anyone.
Okay.
So we wanted to have all heads of department to be female. At the time, it was really still like, a small percentage were women. So we had a female gaffer, we had a female DP, female sound, production manager. Our grip was a man. Our Steadicam was a man. First AD was a man. Second AD was a woman. So first AD was a woman. First AC was a man, because the DP wanted to work with Henry at the time. So, certainly, but we had the intention, and we did have a lot of people who were local on the island. That was the other thing that we really wanted to try and do, is not just parachute in with our team. So for example, a production manager had never done any film, but she used to plan weddings. So it's the same skill set, really. It's like getting people from the church to the venue. You've got to get them from one location to the other in all the right cars, and organize the logistics of moving people from A to B. And she did an amazing job. And our line producer, who then doubled up, sound recordist, Bethany, she was from Isle of Man and also a filmmaker, as was Neve, sound recordist. So we had quite a lot of women on the team, and that was really lovely, actually. But we wanted it to be local. So even if people didn't have the right skill set, they were working up. So our assistant set designer, she was a local artist, and she was really underconfident about taking the role. We initially wanted to give her the art direction role, but she didn't want to take it. But she came on as an assistant to our art director, Zara, and she was amazing. Like, she totally was, grew in that project. And I think that, going back to one of your earlier questions about grassroots, and I think, you need a right balance, because, obviously you've still got to get the work done. And people also got to learn from seeing good practice as well.
And so you didn't actually start this short film with making it into a feature in mind?
No.
Is that more just a reaction to
so that came about at the Barcelona Film Festival, a short film festival in Barcelona, not the main one, a sort of smaller one, that the film got in, and it got in quite early on. It was like our first film festival that said yes. Like, we literally applied and we got a response straight away. So we were really high with that news, and we sort of felt quite attached to them, because obviously this is now COVID times, and they were really keen to make sure that the festival ran in person. So in September last year, it finally ran for the first time, I think, second time. And, there we had an LA producer see it and love it. And she just kind of went, oh my God, I'm going to make this into a feature film. So Sonia was amazing at sort of kickstarting that process. I was at Pitching Lab in Greece at the time, and Liz had gone to the festival. And so we were a bit naive about what that means and what we had to do. And at the time we were thinking, this is going to be really easy. We just do a kind of longer version, and we'll just set it on the Isle of Man. And then once you start on that journey, you realize, no, it doesn't really work like that, because now it's a feature film. The Isle of Man don't give any tax credits. It makes it really hard to raise the money to shoot it there. And then artistically, I was thinking, I don't really want to shoot it again in the same place. So it'd be nice to have different visuals to it. So I sort of focused on, what does this mean to be a feature film? Like, I don't want to tell the same story, because I've told that story. So so then what's another story? What's the, so it was really starting from scratch. But I was very lucky that while I was at the pitching lab in Greece, I'd got on very well with one of the tutors there, a guy called Stephen. And he was brilliant. And I brought him on board early on as a script editor. So to have someone to bounce ideas off and help with, because we thought we were doing this immediately. So I got cracking, and we had a first draft this time last year, actually. And, not a very good first draft, but I think we had the backbones and the structure of the story that we wanted to tell. And then it's been a process of rewrites. And I think now, I feel very confident with the script that we've ended up. We've also been to a lab, and that's also helped it. So we started to walk on the journey of a feature film, and every step we learn something new. So, but one of the things that with this project we put in straight away is, a strategy to engage an audience at an early stage. So we're just looking to also raise money for that, so we can, take something from something very, we're not just making the film, but we're also trying to have a global reach. And so we went to Cannes last year, and there we met our co-producer in Greece. So every step gives you another piece to the puzzle. And every step, maybe one piece might shift and fall out. So you have to find another one. And so it is like making a picture with different pieces. And you don't always know what those pieces are until you actually find the first one. And I think that's why making your first feature can be exhausting. And I think for you as a producer, having a slate will help you, because not all films have the same model in terms of finance or in terms of, putting them together. And I think one of the other things that we've realized with this one is that if we do want it to be seen and to have work on a critical acclaim level, we need lots of the right kind of money coming in. It's not just about the money to make it. It's who's putting that money in and how much clout do they carry within the industry, because they will push your project. If you look at the films that get anywhere, they're all backed by institutions and individuals that matter, because otherwise it's never just on its own merits, unfortunately. If you're coming, I think it can be if you're coming from less developed countries in the film industry wise. If you make a good film coming out of Egypt or Pakistan or India, maybe not India because India's got a massive industry, but definitely Pakistan or Bangladesh, that people want to see that, because that is a different viewpoint, it's a different voice, and that will travel. But if you do an okay film coming from, America or the US, the US or UK or, France, and you're not backed by anyone, no one's really going to give a shit about your film. Yeah. You can do an okay film that's backed, then it goes somewhere. If it's not backed by anyone, there's no skin in the game. No one cares.
And so you wasn't necessarily starting Losing Grace to be a feature, but were you thinking about making a feature sort of sometime soon? Was that always...
Yeah, so I had another project which is still on my slate for a feature film, which is set in Cyprus. It's a kind of coming back home story, and so I had that as a feature film that I was working on. I was also developing, well, it was at the same time, we got another project with a Swedish writer, which is also set in Greece and Sweden. And I'm also adapting a novel, which is also set in Cyprus and London. So my kind of Greek roots are very much part of the slate of films that I have. So yes, I did have a feature film. So Losing Grace, I had started thinking, to use it as a premise for a TV series. So that's also an option. So thinking about, what projects can give you mileage, in transmedia terms. You can write other elements of it. I think that's kind of where Losing Grace comes in. We hadn't thought of a feature for it, but I think that I'm glad we went down that road.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sonia.
So Losing Grace ended up, or so you got in first to the Barcelona festival as the first film festival, but then it's done pretty well at other festivals. Was that?
Yeah, it's done all right on that kind of third tier festival circuit. A couple of sort of, Oscar, BAFTA nominating recognized festivals as well. It's done 60 festivals. It's won like 20 awards and a few nominations and stuff like that. And I think for an indie, totally indie kind of short film, it's done okay, but as a filmmaker, you're moving on all the time, aren't you? And we want to use that in our campaign for raising awareness around the topic. And so, putting it out there in a more, sort of in a way that can help people, because I think it is a powerful story. And for organizations working with survivors of domestic abuse, if it can serve them in any way, then amazing. If your film can have impact in a real sense, then, that's really the goal, actually. So that's our hope with it.
Did you have, for not just this film, for any film, did you have much of a film festival strategy before you made it? Or is it more just after it's made, seeing what you could apply to?
A little bit we started thinking about it. We did work with the festival doctor on Losing Grace. I don't know how much of that helped.
Right.
I think Rebecca was great in giving advice. I think you got to do your research around festivals, because there are, I think there's something like more than 10,000 film festivals out there, and they all cost money.
Yeah.
Some cost more than others. And there's the top ones. There's your Sundance, your Berlin, your Cannes, your Venice. I mean, forget it. Like, don't even bother spending your money to go there. Your Locarnos, all of these, because they're already sewn up with the films that are going to be in there. I mean, unless your film is doing something amazing, like, you've got to sit back and go, I'm shooting it in Antarctic and I'm wrestling with a polar bear. And are there polar bears in Antarctic? I don't know. Or penguins. I don't know. There's Father Christmas, whoever. Unless there's something remarkable going on in your film, if you've independently financed it, forget the big ones. Because the lower tier ones, like, again, the London Film Festival, forget it unless you're funded by BFI. They're feeder festivals for those funding schemes. Or unless you're coming from a country that they support. You're not going to be interested, in certain topics. But you do have the BFI Futures. If you're young, you can send it off to that. But yeah, so there are festivals that have their kind of you know what they want. And if your film is not that, do not send it there. You need to think about anywhere you want to go, do your research, see what other films were there the year before. Can you see your film there? And be prepared to travel with your film, because if you're not, that's when you miss the opportunities. So really, every festival that we've been to, something's come out of it. You meet someone, something happens. And sometimes it's supporting, sometimes like one of my favorite, I think a festival that I think is really punches above its weight for short films is the Soho London International Film Festival, Soho LIFF. I mean, it happens in November, and all the films that they choose are brilliant, but they are, really chosen on merit. There is no other agenda. They have great panels. Same with the London Independent Film Festival, have great industry panels. So I think when you're choosing, you need to choose and go, what does this festival offer me? For example, if it's just offering a screening, sometimes asking you to pay to go and see your film, I'd give it a miss. Unless you've got a link to that part of the world, and unless you are from that place and you've got family that will go and see it, and that's a great way of sort of showing your work. So yeah, you need to sit and look at them, look at what people say about film festivals as well, because the reviews are really telling, and those are the most important things. And have a budget.
A budget for entering into film festivals.
Yeah, because there are 10,000 film festivals. And on Film Freeway, it can really start adding up, and before you know it, you've you're in £1,000 and you're like, shit. So your credit cards is what absorbs all of this. I would also, if you are going to be sending things to film festivals, is worth investing in the gold pass, because it does add up what you pay, because you're not just going to do 5 festivals, you'll probably do quite a few. Be clear about it's where you want it to sort of start and end, and why the festival as well.
For anyone listening, Gold Pass on Film Freeway, it's a monthly or annual subscription that can get you discounted entry fees to gold film festivals that have sort of,
which is most of them, and it's like 50% less. And if you're applying to 100 film festivals, which is probably about the minimum, in order to get some kind of traction, then you're looking at, it could be like £200-300.
Yeah.
So it's worth it, but have a budget and then prioritize those festivals.
And then your short film Daughter, did that come after Losing Grace, or about the same sort of time?
But the development for that started before. So for Daughter, I'd put a call out for scripts, and I got a whole bunch through and narrowed it down to 3 that I really loved. And I met with the writers as well, and I just really clicked with Jo, and we all then worked out we kind of met in a previous life, and I don't mean in a previous life in a spiritual way, but years back when she was an actress and she was in a company with a very good friend of mine at a drama school. So we kind of, oh my God, yes, I saw you in that. And so we kind of connected, and we didn't live far from each other. So we used to meet quite regularly and just talk through the script and build up a way of getting it made. Because at that point, it was just me interested in a script with a view to put it for some funding. And we did put it into funding. We got shortlisted for BFI Network Award, which was great. So we went for a whole week of development with them. And that was, although we didn't get it, we were really committed to making the film. And so with that one, we got a producer on board. We got one of the actors on board early on, because she was a good friend and someone who I saw in the role. So we had, and LA was amazing in sort of then introducing us to the producer. We used the same casting director as we did for Losing Grace, we did for Daughter, Janice Jaffa. And so she was able to get us Juliet Cowan, who doesn't normally do short films, but really loved the script and liked my work. And it was a small thing. And this was in the middle of COVID. So we had kind of gone into, so although the project was alive before Losing Grace, I think I was just literally going off to shoot Losing Grace when I was meeting with the producer, Grace, so Grace Nelder was the producer, not Losing Grace. There's a lot of Graces in this project. And just before going to shoot, met Grace. And so then when we came back, we were on that project. And then we were in lockdown. So all the development and pre-production happened in lockdown. And then we had a window in September 2020, I think. 2021, I don't remember now. We had a window and we had most of the money. We crowdfunded, and then through the crowdfunding, we got Lucas Ferreira saw the project and loved what we were saying about it, and he came on board with quite a substantial contribution that made it all possible. And because we were in lockdown, we had to really think about this film being small, and we found a great venue to house everybody, Kitley House out in Plymouth, where it's normally a wedding venue, like for high-end weddings, but there was no weddings happening. So they took us on board with our very, very menial budget for accommodation and food. They just took it away. Yeah, we'll do whatever you want for 3 days. And so it was all made possible by looking at the opportunities of those issues, really.
Yeah.
But again, if we had waited, we then went into another lockdown straight after that. So
it's interesting that talking about how these projects started, both Daughter and Losing Grace, and even the documentary you talked about earlier, the one you sort of first made, they all have like different ways of starting. Do you find that with short films, like, or just your projects in general, like there's not like a set way that it begins?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. David Lynch talks about this whole idea of fishing for ideas, or how ideas come to you and how opportunities come to you, I think is the other thing. Is like there's just little things that sort of almost in the fringes of your periphery vision of an idea, of a possibility. And if you grab it in that instant, and it may become something. So quite often it's about, so this other project that I'm working on with, so it's a novel by Sula Christodoulou called The Summer Will Come. And I met her on the tube in London, just by chance. And we got chatting. I didn't know her, she didn't know me. Didn't know she was a writer, she didn't know I was a filmmaker. About 5 years ago. And we just then kept the dialogue alive over the years. And 5 years on, I've just in the process of adapting her novel. Since then, she's now got a 4-book deal with a publisher, and this is going to be republished. I think the most important thing is really relationships, because I think every time I've done a project has been because of the relationship with the people involved, more so than the ideas. If that makes sense.
So was he a writer, director, producer, or sometimes producer? Is that what happened with this project?
Well, Joe and I were both producers on that. Like by the time we got Grace involved, the project had gone quite far. So then when Grace got involved, we can just step back and she can worry about the logistics of sorting stuff out. But I'd already had a DP and a whole team, because we were working with Bournemouth University and Babak Jani. And then we already had some of the cast. So I brought on Janice Jaffa to cast it. So we had Julia. So we already had quite a few elements that, before a producer came on. Because I think with finding producers that you don't know for a project that you're working on is really hard. Because also for producers, they've got to live as well. So where are they making the money? Because the way funding is there's very little, in development, if anything at all. And at this stage of independent film, there's nothing. So you have to be prepared to do the work, to get it to a point where someone can go, okay, now I have a package of stuff, I can go and maybe pitch it to people or think about how, we can sort of best maximize this. I mean, I think with short films, it's slightly different, but it's also with features, you have to sort of take on that work to get it to the point where it's almost ready for someone to come on board and be your producer. Like, if you watch Dragon's Den, they always send you away if you're the person that's gone, I've got this really good idea. about, a pair of scissors with one handle. And they're like, well, what have you done with it? Have you taken it anyway? Have you spoken to it? No, it's a really good idea. It's not enough. It's not enough to have a really good idea. It's not enough to have a good script. It's not enough to have a good pitch deck. As someone told me, it's just words and pictures. Who gives a shit? But what they want to know is, okay, so what are the elements here? Do you have cast? Do you have locations? Do you have a real budget? Do you have, and it's chicken and egg, but you have to do the work. And when you have enough pieces and there are a few missing, that's when you can go and talk to somebody.
And so you mentioned being involved in a couple film labs, and I know from your, I think it was your Twitter bio that you're involved with the Torino Film Lab and the Film London, or had been Film London Lab. How much of those sort of experiences helped you with projects?
Invaluable. So the Torino Film Lab was with my feature film that's set in Cyprus, and going on that, to get selected on the lab. And I think Torino especially, which is quite a high end lab, you just have a week where you're just focused on that story. You have loads of small groups and one-to-ones, depending how they structure it, but you really get to interrogate your work, and you may come out going, haven't got a story here, and all too often, or you get to a point where you really know that you've got something that you can develop. And then, so Film London as well, although the project didn't take off, it has kind of fed into the other projects that I'm working on. But also, I think the knowledge, again, in all of this stuff that we're talking about has kind of come from labs. And so I think for anybody developing an idea, absolutely get it into labs. And there's some brilliant ones. I mean, the last one we went to with Losing Grace, her arts was probably one of the best labs I've been to in terms of story development. And that's out in Paestum in Italy, and it's for women. And it happens twice a year. So they're about to go into their third edition of it. And it's just phenomenal. And I think for us, it was a real game changer in terms of the story really moving to the next level, but also because of our conversations there with the tutors and everything, really understanding what we did have already in play and how we can maximize it, and just giving us the confidence really to know that we had a good, solid project. So I think labs, not enough of them, is my thing, but I think definitely is where, your work can move to the next level.
Yeah. And are you, when you're in the film labs, are you connecting with other filmmakers in it as well? So are you like growing a community through that?
Absolutely. And that's so important, because if you're in this for the long haul, they're going to be your support network. And it's great when you talk to people who are maybe ahead of you, maybe just behind you, or just coming in and, wherever they are in their journey, and realizing that we all share the same problems, whether someone's on their third feature or you're about to make your first feature, and just hearing those stories and getting support and building a network, because it is who you know. And so when you don't come into this industry with a silver spoon, you have to go out there and work the room. And you do that by turning up to everything that you can that is industry related. Because sooner or later, you'll start meeting the same people, and then you start building relationships, and you start having conversations, and so will refer you to so-and-so. And so people know your work, their work. You start having a network. So it was interesting when I went to Cannes last year. And I didn't go with the view to pitch or anything like that. I felt we weren't ready for where we were with the project. But it felt important to go and connect. And had the most amazing conversations, but also realized how many people I did know. Like I went there in 2012 and I knew nobody. But in 2022, I was not alone. Like I knew so many people and I was never alone. And there was always someone, or I was meeting someone new, or, you'd bump into people and you have real conversations. And, I didn't even go and pitch anything, but walked away with a co-producer and a location and all sorts of other things.
Move back to talking about your lecturer job for a second. So it's practical course based, is it?
Yeah, so I don't teach on the technical aspects of filmmaking. I'm not the how to use a camera person or how to use the lights, but I get them to think about what are they saying inside the frame, how are they expressing their story. So I do a directing course, I do a screenwriting course, I do a documentary course as well, and a short film production module as well. So they get to make films, and I try as much as possible where possible to kind of mirror what goes on in the industry. So at least they can come out and they know how to do a pitch deck. Yeah. Because even if it says optional, it's not optional. It's always essential. If you don't have one, forget it.
Yeah. And what's some maybe recurring advice come up a lot with students?
I think I think there is this belief that you will make something and it will be great and you will succeed and go on and then, Steven Spielberg will come and give you millions to make your next film, and Marvel will come knocking on your door for one of their franchise series. That I think that the journey feels like it's really one little short film away from mega success. And I think what I try to instill in them is that it's not necessary. I mean, it can be that, of course, you can get lucky, but I don't think that necessarily is lucky either. I think if you don't know who you are, if you don't know what your voice is, if you don't know what it is you're saying, then it's very easy for people to come in and tell you what you should be saying. So you can have, let's say you can have an amazing success and your film wins Sundance, but this is your first film. And by accident, you stumble into a success because your film happens to be the zeitgeist. It does something. You don't even know what it's doing, but it does it. And you win Sundance. And then a Channel 4 exec comes up to you and goes, my God, you're the next best thing. So let's bring you in. I know, let's make that into a feature film. And before you know it, you're stuck in development hell because you haven't had the chance to think about what it is you want to do. So, you might get stuck with someone else giving you notes, and then they go away, and then someone else new comes in, gives you different notes, and you could be there forever. So it's really important, I think, when you're starting out in film or in any creative art, to take time to find your voice, to take time to understand your craft and rigor at different levels, and not to feel rushed. There's no boat that's leaving and you're going to be left at the harbour. It's going to take you the time it's going to take you. But if you are committed to that journey, you will find your Ithaca, you will get there. But it would only be worth anything, as in the poem, if you make that journey matter, if you make the connections that you have meaningful, if you take time to enjoy that process, that's where the learning's happening. And you know what? You will fuck up. You will connect with people that are not good for you and who it doesn't work. And you just have to learn as well. It's very easy to feel there is somebody out there giving you an opportunity that you have to take. It's not like that. You are the opportunity for someone. So you need to hang on to that as well. So if someone says, oh my God, I love your idea, Rachel, I want to produce it. And you can feel, oh my God, that's like amazing. I just found this magic thing, the producer. But they might not be the right person for you because you haven't thought to ask them what are they going to give you. And I've made that mistake, completely. And I'm at the place and I went like, no, actually, what are you bringing to the table? And if you're not bringing, anything more than what I've already got, then you're not the right person. So it's okay to walk away from these things if they don't feel right. And like we talked about that at the beginning, like, your intuition and your alarm bells, they are your best friend. And just sit with it and, you'll make the right decision because it will feel right when you make it. You won't feel anxious. And so listen to those little signs in your body that tell you what's what.
Yeah.
But I think it's patience, really.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't circumvent it. You just have to do the work. Yeah, it's always about the work.
Yeah. I remember when I sort of first get into film, one of my family members said to me, well, what happens if you don't make it? And I was just kind of like, is there a time limit? Like, what is this structure you're sort of imposing on me? I'll just keep going, I guess. Like,
yeah, and you're never, because you're not static. If you keep moving, you go, well, it doesn't mean, you're not going to wake up one morning and go, I haven't made it, because you'll be somewhere else with it. You might be working at the BFI. Because you may have produced, 5 films. Maybe they didn't become like, great roaring successes. But hey, that knowledge is something. You might then become, all sorts of avenues grow through that. And you might find yourself working in the gaming industry, but you won't see that where you are now. So it's kind of, just get on with it. As long as you keep moving, keep taking the next step, and learning is happening, you're always making it. And I think that for me is the thing, is like quite often you get frustrated because things take longer and you think, when am I going to, when is it ever that thing going to happen? But actually I just think, well, the thing is happening. I'm here talking to you today about what I do. So that's the thing, I'm talking to the novelist about her novel. That's the thing. I talk to my producer about, the meeting they just had. That's the thing. So I'm doing it. And so, I don't think the answer happens when you've made your film. I think you've still got the same questions.
Yeah. Is there any other, just off of what we've sort of talked about today, any other advice or tips you'd give to people listening? So, something maybe you wish someone told you a few years ago, anything like that?
I think listen to your instinct. Don't undersell yourself. Have the courage to go with what you feel is right. But at the same time, also listen to advice. And you know what? Just turn up. Don't think that you've got to be ready to begin. You are ready now. You are where you are now. So if now is all I'm just interested in film, but I haven't got, I don't have. That should not be an obstacle. It should be like, okay, I'm interested in film, so let me go somewhere where I can find out a bit more about it. Or I want to make film, but so let me start looking about where I can find those first steps. And, it is those baby steps, because everything will happen as a series of little tiny incremental steps that will lead to slightly bigger opportunity. But if you hadn't done the little steps, you wouldn't get to those big changes. And don't worry about rejection. You will get hundreds of rejections. Rejection is part of it, and it's not personal. It's just they're not the right people for you, for this time. But you always, that relationship might find its in 5 years down the line. So, always be nice. Just don't know. Such a small world at the end of the day. And just get out there and meet as many people, and you'll meet them again and again and again. And don't be a dick.
Yeah, I've heard that before. No one wants to work with assholes.
No one wants to work with assholes. Yeah. And you know what? If they have a choice between someone who looks like they're talented and someone who's a really nice person who turns up and does the work and, is no pain, always you will go with that person. I don't give a shit about someone's talent or no talent, whatever, At the end of the day, this is hard enough without being saddled with people with egos and, their own angry stuff going on, not turning up, not being reliable, not doing the work, Do the work. Don't worry about what it looks like for the outside world. And if you make a shit film, own it. Turn up with it. It's a bit like having an ugly baby. You're not going to love it less. You still got to sort of love it because it will be a step to the next one, Don't hide your work in the cupboard because, it's not ready yet. Just send it to the right festivals for that.
That actually reminds me, I don't know whether you've experienced this as well, but I went to a director talk last year with Lotus Hannon, who's a local-ish filmmaker to me, who's sort of started to get involved in TV. And she was talking about how women won't apply for things unless they meet sort of like 95, 100% of the criteria. But men, it's a lot less than that.
Oh, yeah.
Do you think that's like...
Completely. Yeah. Women will go, I'm not ready to, they'll apply for less money as well. And yeah, whereas blokes will bullshit their way through it. And I think watch that, it's good to learn from that. I remember that I had a student and he, in his first day screenwriting module, he was from France and he said, I've got a script for a feature film. Can you read it? Because I'm going to make it when I graduate. And I was like, okay. I didn't think he wasn't going to. I thought something about him. He had so much belief in himself. I knew he was going to do it. And he did. Not in the first year. He did it in his second year of graduating. A film called Trendy. I think it was on Amazon for a while. Did really well. It opened at Raindance. Great feature film. I mean, a bit flawed in the writing. But he totally owned this project. And, they raised money and a lot of the people on the crew were from Queen Mary. And then he went to Columbia and did an MFA in film. And I think he's just finished his second feature now. So I think the point I'm bringing this up is that I was at the point where I was thinking, I'm not even ready to say that. And there was this kid who was literally had no quiet. And I just thought, oh my God. And that was, for me, was a turning point where I just went, what am I waiting for? Like, when is the day I'm ready to put this stuff out there? And I had all these films and I hadn't even put out. I never sent them to festivals, or because I didn't think they were good enough, and holding on to stuff. And you just think, oh my God, that is such a waste of energy, and that advice would be, get your work out there, it's fine. I've gone to so many festivals where I see so much shit, but I always admire the people who turn up and they put their shit in, because you just go, well, you're owning it. You're there in the room and people applaud beginnings and potential and the fact that you've turned up and the fact that you've done it. How hard is it for someone to make a film? It's a bloody miracle that anything does get made. And so it's always a celebration. So don't ever think you're never good enough. Just keep going and just see what happens, but enjoy the ride.
Yeah. So obviously you've got a couple projects, well, probably a few projects, sounds like, on the go. Is there anything that you want to improve on yourself as a filmmaker? Like So is there anything that something you want to work on for you?
I think that's a great question. I think it has been a journey of personal development. And I think for anyone working in the creative arts, because you're always putting yourself out there with your work and yourself, and it's open to judgment and criticism, that can always, if you haven't done the work on yourself, it can feel very personal. So in a way, the personal development has gone hand in hand with the growth, my own growth as a filmmaker, gaining the confidence to just own my stuff, own my shit, basically, in the room when it comes to my work. But also I kind of go, you're always learning. So there isn't anything that every now and again something will test you, and it's a really great opportunity to kind of go, what's the learning here? And I think I've got to the point now where I don't stress over stuff. If things don't happen, yeah, you're allowed a little moment of feeling, I wish they said yes or whatever. But it's not like the end of the world. It's just, okay, that's not the way. We'll find another way. And always the third way, and always the alternatives are good. And I always find when you look back, the things that didn't happen were the best things that could have happened, because had they happened, you would have been in a very different place. So I trust more in how things evolve. I trust more in what I do. But that's been a process to get there. I'm not beholden anymore to external validation. So I think that is important. Like I need to be comfortable with what I'm making, and it's okay. People will like it, not like it. I don't care, and I genuinely say that. I don't care in the sense that, not because I don't care like what people think. I care what people think, but it doesn't affect me. Like, that's okay. Anyone can think what they like, but it's not an impact on what I do.
Thank you, Athena, for joining me. I think it's been a really interesting conversation. I liked when you said about being the person in the room that knows the least, so you can learn from people. I've not heard it sort of put that way, and I think that's really interesting. And I'm sure people listening have gained a lot from this conversation as well. Where can people find you and what you're doing?
So I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. I've got my own production company, and I teach at Queen Mary. So if they want to apply and do an MA there in filmmaking, feel free. I think it's a really good way to get in to make film, because you pay your fee, but you walk away with 4 films, so which would cost less if you were to try and make them on your own. So I think that's another way of making films, is doing a master's. And then, and through my website, which is Aegis Film Productions.
Thank you again for joining us, and hopefully we'll see Losing Grace in the cinemas in a few years, maybe.
Yeah. We'll come back and talk about it then.
Definitely. Yeah. Right.
That would be brilliant. And thank you, Rachel. It's been lovely to meet you too.
Well, that's almost a wrap for another episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to my guest for this week, Athena Mandis. If you want to follow Athena on social media to find out more about her work and to stay up to date with her projects, then you can find her on Instagram and Twitter at Athena_Mandis, or you can go to her website, which is Aegis Film Productions. That's AEGIS filmproductions.com. Earlier this week, I returned to City Eye to record the next episode of the Blue Moggy Podcast, where I was joined by musicians and film and TV composers Chris Wood and DL. I had a great time talking to Chris and DL about music and film and how they both got into composing, and shared a few stories of projects they've worked on. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing that episode with you in 2 weeks' time, because the Blue Moggy Podcast is released every other Wednesday. So that will be out 2 weeks from this episode releasing. So make sure you've liked, subscribed, followed the Blue Moggy Podcast wherever you're listening to this episode, and follow us on social media to stay up to date with news and information about more guests coming up. In April, there will be a couple more episodes focusing on some different roles and areas of the film media industry that we haven't got into yet in the podcast. So I'm really excited to share those with you. But once again, that's all we've got time for today. So make sure you're following on social media. Send us any comments or suggestions or questions if you have any. You can find us on social media at Blue Moggy Media, or go to bluemoggymedia.com. But once again, it's time to hit play on the Blue Moggy theme, and I'll see you later.